that person to even more. So the point is this, it's about some skills here in terms of how we build trust. Two ways to build trust, and I'm going to come on to it a bit more later. Two ways to build trust that you want to gain from other people. There are two really interesting things. These are, again, you'll find will work in your general life, very importantly. The first is this. Understand their reality. Try to understand their world. And, some people have said it, first seek to understand, then be understood. Try to understand the world from their point of view. It's called empathy as well. Look at why they're going through it. It's called look at their lived reality. Someone, for example, who grew up in a poor family, in a poor area, where there was lots of criminals, ended up in a gang selling drugs. Try to understand the world that they came from, and how that world created them. That's the first thing. Try to understand their world. And you need to be competent. You need to be skilled in terms of being able to do that. When you understand their reality, then you can understand why. The second thing is called compassion. Show that you genuinely care about an individual. Now, in a situation, if I'm counseling, I can meet someone and that person recognizes that, Alyas, he understands me. He doesn't really care about me. It's not going to have the impact. Or, you can say, he really cares about me, but he doesn't understand me. It doesn't have the impact. You've got both of those there. He understands it. He speaks my language. He knows my world. He knows where I've come from. He knows why I became the way I've become. Okay, and part of it is because I've listened to the person, rather than just want to get my... Active listening is very important. Listening is a skill that we don't actually do very well. And then the second part is that genuine care for that individual. Okay, let's move on now. Can I have next slide, please? I've already touched it. A person is cognitively smart, but unable to manage his emotions, therefore not very emotionally intelligent. Being aware of your emotions and your moods as you are having them. What do you do when you get anxious or stressed? What feelings do you have in your body as you experience your emotions? So this is also an important part. As we know, stress and anxiety, and that's why it's important to be holistic here. It has a psychological impact. It has a physiological impact. There's an adrenaline pump. When we're anxious and stressed, we sweat more. Our blood pressure goes up. Our emotions get heightened. There's hormones that are released that also can get us a bit more, pumped up. There's a physiological response, there's a biological response, there's a behavioral response. I'll behave in a particular way. It's being able to identify all of those signals. And it's interesting that, again, for example, with regards to anger, it creates all of that. It's psychological, it's physical, it's emotional, it's biological, behavioral, and it's picking up on all of those. Okay, what do you do when you get anxious? So that when I can see that a trigger has gone off, I need to modify my behavior, because the next thing that's going to happen is boom. So that's emotional intelligence. Don't allow the boom to happen. Don't allow yourself to go to the next stage where it's going to result in inappropriate behavior. That's the point there. When you know that how your body is reacting to a situation. In the same way that someone who's getting depressive symptoms, they're starting to get that negative spiral. They're getting a negative view of the world. And everything that happens to them, even though good things are happening to them, they just see it in a negative way. They just go down this negative spiral of thinking and thinking and thinking. And then their body starts to isolate themselves socially. And then also they start to lose their energy. Even though, they've been sleeping all night. Okay, the sleep pattern goes all over the place. Sleep pattern is a very important thing. And then what you'll notice in that individual is that, the energy is gone. So, again, this is picking up on those symptoms as early as possible. And when you see those symptoms in an individual, that you can see that stress, that anxiety, that depressive kind of symptom, that sadness, do you have reflexive or automotive behaviors that might have earned you some unpleasant labels? So again, what it means is that as a result of this behavior, sometimes we like to label stuff and not understand stuff. Next slide, please. Okay, can we move on, please? Yeah, move on. Okay, in terms of emotional intelligence, again, if I break emotional intelligence down, self-awareness, Okay, self-regulation, touched on that in the question. Motivation and passion. Okay, knowing your empathy and social skills. We've touched on all of these. Can you move on, please? Go through. Okay, what do we mean by self-awareness? We've touched on that. You always know how you feel. A clear picture of your strengths and weaknesses. Now, this is, again, a practical tool for everyone here. You know SWOT. We've heard of SWOT, yes? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Do you know it's the most... I've done an MBA as well in my kind of academic career, and I've got to say, of all the tools that I use, SWOT is still the most effective tool that I use as a planning tool. However, sometimes we don't apply enough on ourselves emotionally in a situation. So, for example, you know, self-awareness is I know my strengths and my weaknesses. You know, in an interview situation, when I do interviews and I work with organizations who interview staff and employees, one of the questions we ask all the time, obviously, is what are your strengths? And when we ask the question, what are your strengths to people, everyone will stand up and they'll puff themselves up and they'll say, oh, these are my strengths, these are my achievements. I'm not really interested that much in their strengths. I'm interested in their weaknesses. And I ask them, tell me your weaknesses. And most people, they haven't thought about it. Or they don't feel aware enough to tell me about their weaknesses. Or it will be very superficial. Or on top of that, too many times I hear, I've got no weaknesses. And generally when that happens, they're not going to get the job. As far as I'm concerned, if a person cannot tell me their weaknesses, okay, then you know what, again, it's the same thing. They are not emotionally strong enough. Tell me your weaknesses. Let me tell you why. Because that's what needs to be developed. And, you know, your strengths can go on and on, okay, but you know, your weaknesses really need to be overcome. And tell me your weaknesses honestly, because that's really what's going to impact in the workplace. So do that list, my strengths, my weaknesses, on an emotional and social level. And look at that, monitor that list. Not the last time anyone made that particular list, you know. And, you know, a weakness could be, you know, I don't invest enough in other people. I don't have enough patience with my family. I'm aggressive. You know, these are, I'm aggressive when I feel that I'm being, okay, put down. And then understandably, I grew up feeling really insecure about my body. And I'm really preoccupied about looking as good as I can. If I go overweight and I get stressed, this is something really important. You know, I have one client, for example, a male client. You know, people think that eating disorders just happen with females. No, he had a male with eating disorders. And every time he would go overweight, he would start, his cocaine habit would come back. Okay, because he needed the drugs to just escape from the reality that he was unattractive. It all comes back to when he was a child. They made fun of him because he was a bit of a large child. Okay, he was a big kid. And so, you know, people made fun of him. So I need to know that weakness. That's the one I need to know. Keep a journal, as I've touched on about self-awareness. You know, every day, maybe write a few things. You know, the whole social media age is such that we're on the social media sharing all manners of things with people who are complete strangers to ourselves. And it's made us external facing, which is good in a way, but internally, you know, come on. Why don't you know, people can spend hours and people say, oh, I haven't got time to do a journal. But you're on Facebook for hours. And you're on social media for hours, and then browsing for hours. You know, take out 5 minutes a day and think about your emotional self. And write about, this is how I feel today. You don't necessarily have to write it. Some of us get more astute that I know how I feel today. I know how I account for myself today. Slow down and examine why. You know, sometimes we do a lot of, you know, even when a bad situation has occurred, you know, a lot of us, we just move on to the next situation. No, sit down and analyze why did that happen. Don't just ask why once. I have a little framework that I use. I call it 5 whys. Ask why 5 times. The 5th answer is usually the correct one. If you can't get it, after 5 still, then ask it 10 times. Why? Why did I do it? Like the 10th why, generally you're getting down to the honesty. So, you know, again, this is important. Slow down. Next, please. Self-awareness. Self-regulation, I've already touched on. Self-regulation is about staying in control, knowing who you are, knowing your values. You know, and this is a really important one. That, and I'm going to touch on this tomorrow when I talk about more about resilience. Values, your kind of value base is so important. Who am I? What defines me? What are my core values? It's really important. Because when you know who you are, what you're about in terms of your core, that is your reference point. When it comes to us making a decision to choose one thing or another, do you know it's made in a millisecond? A decision is made in a millisecond between two choices. How our subconscious mind, our brain, which is so amazing as a processor, what it does is within a millisecond, it's chosen, it's cross-referenced with our core values, and it says yes, no. When I'm working with a young person who's in prison, their core values, or of the values that they've learned, is rob, steal, kill, pimp, abuse, cross-reference. Should I do it? Should I not do it? Yes, do it. So what are your core values? How are they constructed? What is your reference point? One of the analogies that I use, is the compass. Can someone tell me what is the compass used for? What's the compass for? Direction. Compass gives us direction. How? By everything calibrated to magnetic north. What is your north? One of the things I work with in terms of young men in particular is when I talk to young men, I say, what is your north in terms of how you respect and value women? What is your north? So immediately, whenever you interact with a female, your point of reference goes back to my magnetic, because then I calibrate my east, south, and west in the same way. What is your magnetic north when it comes to? And people say it's about respect, it's about treating them well, it's about making them feel safe. Or most of them will say to treat a woman just as I would treat my own mother and my sister and my own daughter. To treat every other woman just like that. So that's your north. Then I've got to embed that behavior in them through their social network or other kind of things. But that's the important thing about self-regulation and knowing your values. You'll make the right choices if you have a clear if you don't know what your values are, if your values are confused or distorted, themselves are completely dysfunctional, then unfortunately you'll make the wrong decisions time and time and time again. Until you actually hold yourself to account, touched on, and practice being calm, aware of how you act. Okay, do you relieve stress by shouting at someone else? Okay, and so these are practical things that we can do. You know, I said there's the emotional response, there's the psychological response. Physical, when I feel myself physically becoming angry, you know, one of the things that my religion teaches me is that when I'm physically getting angry, okay, to lie down. That's what it says, yeah? You're standing up, sit down or lie down. Take some water. If the person is there and he's making you angry, go away from the situation. Leave that situation. So there's practical things in terms of self-regulation. Next, please, motivation. Okay, and you see, the thing about emotional intelligence and honesty that comes from it creates a motivation for us to really work towards our goals. And what it means is that one of the things about emotional intelligence, it gives us what I call resilience, emotional resilience, which I'll talk more about tomorrow. That is that, look, everyone in this room, you will have challenges in your life. You will have emotionally challenging experiences. Everyone's going to have to experience them at some point. Bereavement, for example, is one of them. Losing people who are close to you. Another one of those challenging experiences is, failure. Big failures that we might have. So these are kind of challenging things. When I have those, by having been emotionally intelligent and knowing who I am and what I am as a person, I have what I call bounce back. Which means that when I have a problem, I don't let that kind of totally take over my life. And I'm able to recover from a situation very quickly. So this is an important one. Re-examine what you're doing, as I've touched on with the 5 whys. Okay, fresh. And when you're motivated, and motivation is really so important. I said that about the passion. Doing those things in our lives that are really important to us. We've got to be 100% focused. If I'm not there 100%, if I'm getting 50%, I'm going to get 25% out. So I've got to put in that. Know where you stand, be hopeful, and find something good, optimistic. And this is the thing about, again, emotional intelligence. I believe emotional intelligence, with it comes the approach that we are optimistic, we are positive about human beings. We have this positive view of humanity. And we have what I call a cooperative instinct rather than a competitive instinct. This is what emotional intelligence is about. In particular, looking at the world positively rather than negatively, rather in terms of conflict and in terms of polarization. So this, I believe